Buchanan. Welcome to Fashion Forensics.
Thank you very much for having me. And welcome to Milan.
Thank you. A designer born in Ohio, you graduated from Parsons University and you started your career as a window dresser. And then you decided to move to Milan in 1995, so exactly 30 years ago, and became Bottega Veneta's first ever design director, debuting their ready-to-wear.
Mm-hmm.
Since then, you've specialized in knitwear, going on to lead knitwear teams across fashion's biggest houses like Max Mara, Off-White, Pucci. And most recently, you've become the Milan fashion director for Perfect magazine, talking and discussing what's happening in the industry and in fashion across all markets. So naturally, my first question has to be, how would you describe yourself now?
It's a very interesting question. So broad. I'm a fashion designer. I really am. And I think about this often because I do so many things and I have done many things, but I think my base is a creative, and my love for design as a craft has always been there since the beginning. So I really am a fashion designer, but I'm many other things. I'm a lover. I'm I say now, not even with any hesitance, but I'm an activist. I am emotional. I am, I'm a fucking fashion designer.
That is you at heart.
That's me. I really am. I mean, all those other things are support to really my craft, but I'm so happy to be able to do that, It's
Yeah.
been a long road.
It is, and you've kind of taken on many hats. You've worn many hats throughout your career. But I want to take you back to kind of the first visual memory you've ever had in your life. Do you remember the first visual memory as a child or a teenager where you were like, oh, I actually want to maybe pursue something in the creative industry because this moves me so much?
I always remember my grandmother, which is my mother's mother, loved lavender. I love lavender, but she loved lavender, and that's a very clear memory because it's a color and it's a space. I can imagine
It's kind of a feeling, a state of mind almost as well.
Yeah,
associated.
and so the association of lavender and my grandmother and my mother and my family and that was a creative thought for me. I never knew what fashion design was. I never even, and it wasn't a thought that ever came in because I just didn't know what it was, in the early stages, but I was always creative, I mean, I was playing with dolls. Me and my brother were always drawing cartoons. So I think art and using my hands started at a very early age. There was no other option, I think, for me other than creativity. But it was really, creating and making things. And there was a bit of fantasy in there as well. It was kind of understanding who I was as a child or who would I potentially be as an adult.
And who were you as a child?
I was very quiet. I'm a Gemini. I come from a family, a broken family because my parents divorced when I was very young. So I was 8 years old. And my two brothers were very close. So we grew up in a single parent household. My mother was she continues to be this incredible, resilient parent. She's a pianist and she worked in communications for the government, American government, all her life. So she worked 2 and 3 jobs in order to support us. So I had a lot of time to kind of fuck around when I was young.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of using my hands, It was playing. I think I had a lot of friends, but I was kind of a recluse in a way, and maybe that had a lot to do with understanding myself, understanding my sexuality, how I wanted to relate to other people. I never had a problem with friends. I never had a problem communicating. That's part of my star sign, I think. But I think that I was a curious child.
Yeah. And that kind of took you into your teenage years. And how was
Mm,
it, growing up in Ohio during that time, as a kind of gay kid?
mm,
Did you have any kind of issues growing up with your sexuality or with who you wanted to be, or was
mm.
creativity encouraged in your household? Because you told me
Yeah,
your mom is a pianist, so she kind of has seen the push and pull of
absolutely.
creative and serious at the same time.
Yeah, no, creativity or being ourselves, me and my brother, was always encouraged. There was never a moment where I felt like I wasn't encouraged to be me, which is a privilege,
Yeah.
and that relates to sexuality, that relates to activity, that relates to, whatever we wanted to be, we were always encouraged. My uncle is also gay, so it was never a question in our household. It was also never really discussed at the early age.
Yeah.
Um, but there wasn't a pressure. And I remember specifically growing up, and I think, in my high school years, prior to finishing high school as a senior, um, I remember going to my mom one day and saying, being very nervous about like this coming out thing, like, okay, I know that I'm gay, but I have to tell my mom.
Yeah.
And very nervous as, a young gay child would be. And then I go to my mom and I was like, I sit down at the kitchen table one day and I'm like, I have something to tell you. And she's like, what the fuck you want to say to me, And I was like, I'm gay. And she was like, duh. she
I
was like,
already knew.
she was like, duh. So I think, I don't know. I kind of feel like growing up, my mom knows me very well. She knows my actions. She knows my emotions, and we're very connected. She's in this incredibly beautiful and humble and protective mother, and I say that is a privilege because I know that doesn't always exist.
Yeah.
So we've been a very closely knit family, and
Especially in those times, in the 80s and
absolutely.
90s.
And to add to that, we grew up lower middle class, in the lower end of middle class, and so we went from, we had very supportive grandparents on both sides, but my mom was a real independent, so she really wanted to raise us, on her own terms. So she would rarely ask for help. So we had, I mean, there were times we didn't have dinner.
Yeah.
It wasn't it was a tough childhood, but it built kind of a resilience in how we see the world and how we operate within the world. There were times where we lived in apartments that was like really one room. So it wasn't. I don't come from any type of privilege in that sense. So it's all very real.
Yeah.
So working hard and being focused has always been instilled in my process, and maybe that
Yeah.
makes me what I am today somehow.
And how did you decide to kind of, you've always been encouraged to be creative, and how did you decide, okay, I actually, would love to try, to try to go into fashion and to try to apply for fashion school? Do you remember the moment where you
Yeah,
decided?
fashion wasn't a thing for me. I mean, listen, I think when I was in Ohio and I finished high school, the first college that I went to was in Columbus, Ohio. So I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. And then Columbus, Ohio was another big city. It's actually the capital. And it was a great city to kind of move into because it was a college town. So there was big universities, Ohio State University. And the college that I went into was called Columbus College of Art and Design. And essentially, Columbus College of Art and Design gave me the four corners, the full 360 in being an artist. So when I left high school, it was art. I didn't
Yeah.
know what that art meant. I was very good at drawing. So I knew that it was going to be using my hands to create something. So I wanted a full kind of scale education in art. So that meant, color concepts, that meant design, that meant form, all of those things. Um, Columbus College of Design was a Disney school, let's say. They recruited illustrators and creatives from there. So it was a great art school, and it still is a great art school. And I walked out of there with an idea and a talent to kind of create. It
Yeah.
wasn't fashion really when I first went to Columbus College of Design, but then came the club. Because when I moved to Columbus, that's when I started going out. In Cleveland, I didn't really go out. I was too young. It was high school. I was really focused on high school and being
Yeah.
me. I was always kind of creative. You have to remember this was in like the 80s, so music started to become an important part of my youth. I was much more interested in progressive music. I was a black kid in Ohio listening to The Cure and Depeche Mode. It was very alternative, but it was an honest alternative. It wasn't faking it. That was just the kind of way that I went. So when I moved to Columbus and I started going out, it was like, oh shit, like there's this other world,
Yeah.
And then I started to meet other creatives. I was able to be out in terms of sexuality and I don't know, it was just an atmosphere where I was able to see others that were like me. So we shared that space. And then the club opened up this whole style world because it was kind of like, oh my God, like, I realized that my, let's say, segue into fashion came through how people wanted to dress themselves and why they dressed themselves in certain atmospheres, And the club allowed that because the club was like, it was like church, you know what I mean? You went into the club and it was like, there's that posse over there, there was that posse over there. And you kind of, as a Gemini for me, you kind of studied what was going on. So I knew that I was interested in style as it related to how people dress themselves and why they dress themselves in a certain way. I knew that I was interested in style because of maybe different forms of music and how that related to style. And to be perfectly honest, I started in the 80s seeing all of these magazines, It was like these magazines for me were mostly UK based magazines, those little style rags that that you would see like Bros and Curiosity Killed the Cat, and those were my icons, It was kind of like
And also that punk
Paul,
movement as
yeah,
well.
Paul Weller. I mean, it was like these were like the icons for me, Boy George. Fucking Boy George.
A lot of
Blew my mind.
trailblazing artists at the time.
Blew my mind, It wasn't about Madonna for me. Like,
Yeah.
Madonna was like, are you kidding? When you had
Too
Boy
commercial.
George, you want to
Yeah.
talk about Madonna? I mean, it was just kind of like, yeah, those were the windows that opened and so by the time that I finished Columbus College of Art and Design, I was like, I'm a fashion designer. It was like fashion, It was like fashion was everything. I started working in retail. I started doing window dressing, and I started doing window dressing by mistake in a way.
That was when you moved to New York to go to Parsons.
Yeah,
College.
well, before I started window dressing in Columbus, Ohio at the Gap. And that was my transfer to New York City.
Mm-hmm.
While I was at college, I had friends that were already in New York, that moved to New York, and I didn't have necessarily an intention to move to New York, but I was like, I want to go to New York and go to the clubs. It was really about the club. I always say this. I met everyone probably that is closest to me and that knows me. I met them somehow in the discotheque. And so I wanted to go to New York because I started going back and forth to New York and I was going out. And this is the late 80s and early 90s in New York City. And it was just
the prime, the golden age of club kids.
Outrageous, there was something to do every night, and you didn't have to go to sleep and and I was curious and I loved watching people. I loved the culture of music and you could be somewhere with a different atmosphere and different environment and different people every night. So that curiosity was what led me there, but I knew that I wanted to go to New York to find what potentially could be on the other side. It wasn't that I thought I was going to like move to New York and soar. I just knew that there was going to be something else there.
Yeah.
So I got a transfer with the Gap to do window display from Columbus to New York City. I worked there for not even 6 months, and then I got a transfer to do window display at Giorgio Armani. Preface, window display in the 90s was like, you have to think of like department stores like Barney's New York and Bergdorf Goodman. The window display is what led everyone into the store. So when you built we had these enormous budgets to create just fantasy in the windows. So it was a real art form. and I was in the center of that, and it was a community of people. We all knew each other. We all passed jobs to each other. In most cases, we were all freelance, and a lot of those people that I met doing window display are still my best of friends today. So it that was my introduction to New York City, and I was in the center of kind of this creative hub. We were all working during the day, and after we finished work, we'd have dinner and we'd go to the fucking club.
Yeah, and it was a creative expression day and night for
Yeah,
you,
it was like
24/7. And I
full
mean,
stop.
you say a lot about how music has really defined your life. And I
Mm,
want to take you to one of your images, which
mm,
was Nina Simone's "Love Me or Leave Me"
yeah.
cover. When you sent me your images, you said that Nina Simone and Stevie Wonder were kind of the soundtrack of your
Mm.
life. Tell me a
Still
little bit,
are.
and still are. Tell me a little bit about this image and the importance of
Well,
those artists.
the importance of Nina Simone is layers, is layers of my life. But that image specifically was based on style. And I think when I first saw that image, I reflected on her as this kind of beautiful black woman. She has an afro. I think that image was taken in the late '60s. Um, Nina Simone was at the brink of being a really kind of visible vocal artist for the civil rights movement. And a lot of her music are civil rights songs that were really specifically geared to black people and what black people were doing in the moment, and how we needed to collectively f- unite together in order to overcome. And I think that her music, because I was listening to her music when I was quite young, and yes, it's rhythmic. I love the fact that she's a classical pianist. A black woman as a classical pianist. No one ever saw that in the
Yeah.
books. You know what I mean? You never considered that that would be, a thing. And, you know, I also love the fact that, she didn't have the perfect voice. She didn't have the perfect cadence, but there was something kind of really kind of disturbing and melodic about her voice. She was just an artist that always spoke to me. Um, and then I looked at that image and I was like, oh my God, she's so fierce too.
Yeah.
So here again, once again, you have the connection of music and style and identity that I always kind of floated to.
And it piqued your interest into her
Yeah, just
world.
in the same way as Stevie Wonder. I grew up with Stevie Wonder. Stevie Wonder was always in my home. We always had the most diverse music in my house, even when my father was around. We were listening to the Rolling Stones. We were listening to Supertramp. Breakfast in America is one of my favorite albums, and it was when people kind of created albums that was based on storytelling. So you listened to the entire album, from start to finish, and it led you through a story. And I think Songs in the Key of Life, by Stevie Wonder it's like my Bible.
Yeah.
It just, you put it on and you just go from one track to the next. But then Stevie Wonder, little Stevie was incredible. I mean, just the style of Stevie Wonder, if not only, I mean, of course, the music and the voice and the songbook, in the same way as Nina Simone. But these are artists that spoke to me musically, that spoke to me identity wise, in words and poetry, but then also in imagery.
And when you kind of talked a lot about finding your identity in New York, also through music and through these artists, what was it like when you started working, you kind of started to be in this industry, and all of a sudden one day you decide, what was it? This even was it even a decision to be like, okay, I want to maybe pursue something else, maybe I want to move somewhere else?
Mm,
Right before you moved to Milan, those
yeah.
times. Before you moved to Milan, what was it kind of like? Did you want to continue your career in New York, or did you always kind of look for different
Oof.
different places?
I didn't know what I wanted to do. No, listen, when I was when I moved to New York City, I remember I didn't intend on going back to school. So I finished Columbus College of Design. I started working window display, and while I was there, after I guess almost the first year, that's when I realized, okay, I want to go into I want to go back to school and I want to major in fashion design. I'd gotten all of my, liberal requirements out of the way. So when I entered in Parsons, it was as a fashion designer as a sophomore. Fashion design was it. So I'd already had gotten my college angst out of the way. So when I went to Parsons, I was really focused. It was about design, and it was about the four corners of design. I had to learn the pattern making. I had to learn the stitching, all of those kind of like technical requirements that are necessary to be a designer were done at Parsons. It was my bread and butter in preparation to be a fashion designer, and it was a great school at the time. This is before Project Runway. There were no cameras there. It was like hard fucking work. I had this incredible draping teacher, Miss Namiki, her hands were like, it was like, God, like so delicate and perfect, and she taught me she taught me how to hold a pin. She taught me how to crease the muslin. It was just this beautiful kind of, precision that she had. And all of those aspects were important to me. I could draw anything. I could convince you just with kind of like a two-dimensional drawing that I knew exactly what I was doing, but I didn't actually know how to make it, So that's what this was about. It was about
The
how
hard
do I
skills.
how do I take it from here to there? And Parsons was that, and I graduated at the top of my class. I won all the thimbles, the silver and the gold, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, I have to find a job. Even if I was working full time while I was going to school full time, still as a visual merchandiser. Then I started being an illustrator inside of these companies. So I was working at the Donna Karens and the Calvin Kleins, and then it was like, oh, I want to get a job as a fashion designer. My mentor was this guy named Gordon Henderson. Gordon Henderson, who happened to be an African-American designer, who had his own collection in New York at the time called Gordon Henderson. He had a lower line called But Gordon. He was one of few Black designers on 7th Avenue that was operating in the 90s, having his own business. As he was my mentor, he awarded me with the thimble. He kind of put me in front of all these designers. So at the time, he put me in front of Calvin Klein. He had worked at Calvin Klein in the past. Met with Calvin Klein. When I sent my portfolio, they all loved it. And then I met them, never got a job. I met with Donna Karan. I met with Ralph Lauren. All of these people. I interned at Michael Kors. So I was prepared and ready for 7th Avenue, but no one was hiring me. And I just thought, oh, they're not looking for someone now. This is not going to work for me. What am I going to do? It just wasn't happening in New York City. So I had to kind of start to think out of the box. But it just so happened that through the connection of visual merchandising that I talked about before, my friend Rodney Patterson, who's also a hat designer, who's operating today as his collection is called Essential, very close friend of mine. He was doing window display at Bottega Veneta on Madison Avenue, which was at the time, let's say the main hub for Bottega, and the offices were upstairs. He said, Bottega Veneta is looking for an apparel designer. They want to start apparel. And I was like, 24 years old. I don't have any luxury experience, but I could convince you of anything with pencil and gouache and paint. I can draw you anything. I didn't know Bottega Veneta. I didn't know what the hell it was. You know what I mean? But it was my responsibility to go and do my research. So I went into the store on Madison Avenue, and I was like, so what's this? Like Bottega Veneta at the
Leather
time.
goods, bags,
It was leather goods.
shoes.
It was Intrecciato. It was a luxury boutique. But in the 90s, my mind was completely somewhere else. I was thinking of Helmut Lang. I was thinking of, there were so many other things. This was the time of like the cool designers like Andre Walker, who was one of, who's a friend of mine, but he was just someone who I admired so much. There were just so many other creative things going on. It hadn't occurred to me that this would be the kind of house that I would potentially enter. But I needed a job, so I went into the store and I kind of like looked around a little bit, did my research. They set up an interview, and going into the first interview, I walked in with a capsule portfolio of just drawings and flat sketches of what I thought a company like Bottega Veneta needed. And it was very like, that's what young designers do. We don't, You know, you don't walk into those situations like thinking you have to be robotic. It was just by
It wasn't a business
gut.
plan, it was a
Yeah.
feeling.
It was just a gut feeling, you know. I
Yeah.
was just like, okay, let's do this based on what I thought. And yeah, 2 weeks later, I was flying to Vicenza as hired. I didn't have a title. They hired me as the ready-to-wear designer at that time. And it was a family-owned business. This is before Gucci Group, which would later become Kering, had purchased Bottega Veneta. So it was the Laura Motedo was essentially the head of Bottega Veneta with her then husband Vittorio, and it was a small team. Manuela Morin, who became my soulmate, was in charge of shoes, and there was bag designers. They had the accessories, you know,
Yeah.
kind of like it was all.
That was their heritage.
Yeah. That was all figured out, but they had no apparel. You know, there was no apparel, so it was. I was hired, and my job was to kind of figure out what would potentially be the face of the apparel for Bottega Veneta.
And you just
so
had one interview. So what did
I had
you
one
have that
interview.
feeling? What was your feeling? Do you remember the feeling of you walking out of that first meeting and thinking, "Oh, I got it," or it went great, or what was your feeling afterwards?
Do you know that I needed a fucking job? I didn't give a shit. Really, I to really be perfectly honest, no. I mean, you know, at 23 years old, you're just kind of like, okay, if this works out, then that's cool. But you know, I probably left there and
Yeah, you're
went
like,
to the
right.
club.
What's next?
No, it wasn't. I didn't feel that kind of pressure that maybe we feel today
Mhm.
in terms of how are they, how am I perceived? What do they think about the work? I liked the work that I did, and it was very calculated in a way. But I didn't know, you know. So I left, but it it took some time. I think they contacted me maybe a week later, and I knew that my conversation with Letta Motedo, we were speaking the same language. She was and is really cool. She was really cool. She, you know, Lota Motedo arrived in America. She was working, not speaking English. She was working for Andy Warhol at the factory at Union Square. She would answer the phone. I guess Andy Warhol apparently thought it was really funny that she didn't speak English, so he made her the secretary. So she would be like "pronto," and she wouldn't know necessarily how to respond. So, you know, she was full of humor and full of style, and for her to really, I mean, like, really think about this, to take the risk to hire a Black American designer in 1994, the end of 1994, to design ready to wear for you, unheard of.
Yeah.
Unheard of. Still unheard of today, but unheard of. So I owe her the world. I think that I was skilled. Was I prepared for the job? Not necessarily. I needed to learn it. But if you just imagine at that time the risk that was involved in her giving me a contract was enormous.
Yeah.
It was enormous. It was almost inconceivable, but I flew off to Italy and I was like, okay, let's do this. And I didn't have time to think about pressure and what that could be. I just kind of had to like start working.
Yeah. Just get it. And I think when you're that young and there's almost this like beautiful naivety of like, oh, this is really cool. I'm gonna do what I really love. Let's see what
Yeah.
happens. But you actually don't realize the scope of it behind it, because again, you know, when you go into a heritage house like that, it's like you don't necessarily know what's
Yeah.
going on behind the scenes.
Yeah. But you know, you always also think that, you know, I guess going into that period, you know, there was some badass shit happening at that time. You know, this is the years of the Gallianos and the McQueens,
Yeah.
and everything was very highbrow. And the motto for Bottega Veneta was "When your own initials are enough." So there was a real subtlety to what I perceived had to happen within that house, which was the polar opposite, really, of what was going on around me. But I had to kind of stay true to form and respecting what I thought would potentially be the apparel for this house. And in the beginning stages were rocky because it wasn't, It didn't
Yeah.
just catch, you know?
And I mean, this is what I want to take you to the second image, which is your very first runway show for Bottega
Yeah.
Veneta, and you're taking about the SS99 show. In
That's like, it's,
it, and you can have them, you can see them in front of you, and
uh,
you know, when you kind of look at this image and you think about, okay, just moved to Milan, just kind of met with all of these people and started to do your own collection.
mm.
What was that period, the very first period of you in Milan, from the moment you landed in Milan to the moment where you took your bow to the first show? What do you remember?
Well, I moved to Vicenza first, and Vicenza was where the factory was. And Vicenza is a beautiful city with Palladio architecture and the Veneto. Nothing like New York City. So I went straight from New York City to this small town in the middle of Italy, where I don't know if they'd ever seen a black person before. I was strip searched when I arrived. I was followed in the stores. You know, I mean, I was. It was a foreign place. I had to. It was a lot of 360 there, and I had to understand and really study the space that I was moving into and how,
Kind of read the temperatures of the rooms.
yeah, how they responded to someone like me and how I could operate within that space. And that was not only in the space of living in the city or being in the city, but also the work relationship with people. I didn't really speak the language. I had to kind of figure that all out. Once I figured that all out, then it was just work, work, work. I worked from night to day and had to build my team. We later on, you know, soon after moved our studio to Milan. So Milan became my home in the early stages. The beginning stages was trial and error. You know, we didn't really show the collection in terms of runway show until 99. So I developed for 4 years doing small presentations and capsule collections before this actual first show happened. So this was I think this was the first show, I think was in, maybe it was 98.
Yeah, SS
Yeah,
99, so 98
yeah,
September.
exactly. And so before that was just all development. It was a retail business. It didn't become wholesale until after this collection. So everything was development. We had a very close, intricate relationship with our Japanese distributor at the time. So a lot of the test in terms of market we were doing in Japan, and they really responded to what we were doing. It was very, for me, luxury always meant being crafted from the inside out. So it had to look just as perfect on the inside as it did on the outside. And this is something that I learned very early on. I started essentially with meeting with knitwear factories, which maybe later on became my love for knitwear, because that's where it kind of started. It was the very first factory that I got for Bottega Veneta was in Milan. It's called Punto Maglia. And this woman named Silvana Galbuzera, who's still retired, but she was my swan song
She
in
was the
knitwear.
lifeline. She
Yeah,
was on speed dial.
she was the one who I was able to, in exchange for really understanding the technical aspects of knitwear, me offering her what I knew about design, and we really created this kind of integral relationship. And I learned everything about knitwear with her. And so with the knitwear and then combining that with these kind of Napa leather separates is how we kind of created this idea. And it was about subtlety, it was about fit, and it was about the mix between American sportswear, which is what I came from, and Italian manufacturing. And the things that I developed in the early stages, you know, I mean, you look at this picture and I have on, you know, a hooded sweatshirt. I was like, that's what I think people want to wear. So I'm going to do a cashmere, beautiful hooded sweatshirt. And that sounds kind of banal when we think about it today. But in that time, no one was doing that.
Yeah.
It was not thinking about, you know, my interpretation was always based on, I want to see what people are. I'm much more interested in what people are wearing on the street than I am a red carpet.
Yeah.
I don't want to dress red carpet. I'm not interested in red carpet. I want to see what how people operate and what they wear and why they wear it. And so that was the approach.
And for you, fashion has always lived on the street and in real life rather than
Always.
in kind of a vacuum and a curated
Yeah.
space. And what was it like when you kind of had something that you actually had was the time. You said you worked
Yeah.
for 4 years to really understand and develop the categories of product. And this first show was kind of, I guess, your first milestone in the Bottega
Yeah.
world and in Milan. What was the feedback like right after? What was the feeling like right after?
Yeah, it was mixed. There were people who really loved it. Polly Mellon, who just died not so long ago,
Yeah.
I mean, just this, she was like the editor's editor, and
One of the biggest kind of icons
I
in
mean,
the space.
A character like Polly Mellon would come into the showroom and she would not be interested to see what you showed on the runway. She wanted to go into the closet. She'd dig into the closet, oh my God, this is amazing, and she was just so charismatic and her comment about the collection just stays with me because it was so, her response was just like what I thought about the collection. It was just this kind of like, it was a good introduction to the apparel, and she loved the subtlety and she had such beautiful things, but she was also very critical of how this should develop, but there were some people that were like, oh my God, like, it's too simple, but there was just, it was like a mixed bag of things.
Yeah.
But the one thing that stuck with me, the one critique that really stuck with me and I learned from, is that this collection existed with only one woven handbag in it, and it was the final look. And I don't know if you remember, this was around the same time also that Marc Jacobs was at Louis Vuitton, and I remember, I think it was Marc Jacobs' actually first collection for Louis Vuitton also. I don't think there was any bags on this for his runway. And unrelated, but I just thought, oh my God, we're only going to show one woven handbag at the end of the show, and it was a white kind of satchel, There were other bags in the show. They were like kind of like fanny packs and kind of like bags that wrapped around the body, but it was nothing woven. And I was like, what the fuck was I thinking? And I looked at the show after and I really studied it and understood it. But I was like, dude, the woven handbag has to be the center of everything that you do. The intrecciato is not just the heritage, but it's the swan song of Bottega Veneta, and that has to be the centerpiece. So what I'm doing is kind of propping up and building everything in support of that as the logo.
The heritage.
Because that is the logo in a sense. There is no logo, but woven, when you see it, you immediately think of Bottega Veneta. So once I realized that, it was like, I was so comfortable. I felt like, oh my God, that's such a weight off my shoulder, because what I have to do is kind of build something that
complements the star of the show in a way. It's a wardrobe rather than one specific look.
Yeah, like what Miss Woven, she's like parading down the center, and everyone else, like we're the hype man, We're like building the hype around it.
And you stayed for how long in Bottega?
I stayed at Bottega until, was it almost 7 years, It was a long time. It was a really long time, and I went from scratch, nothing, to building a studio, to building a team, to learning. It was like my school in luxury goods, you know what I mean? It was like my third school. And by the time that it was, that's where I met Katie Grant. I met Katie Grant at Bottega Veneta. She was the first stylist that we ever worked with. And so it was everything for me. And but I knew that in the time that it was ending, it was time for me to go, because me and Manuela, we really wanted to eventually start something, yes, of our own, that had no history.
Yeah.
And I say this at a time in like early 2000 when in Milan, young design, or the idea of young design, was very few. There were very few kind of small projects that were happening at the time in Milan, and it was a great job. We had great opportunity. And I think that I ran the course. I started getting somehow this just itch to do something else,
Yeah.
And I walked out of Bottega Veneta like super happy with my accomplishments. It was I think it was a period when like I wasn't a name designer. It kind of that story kind of went in a very subtle way. I was always a discreet creative as I still am today. So it really wasn't about
The celebrity
anyone
or the front of.
waving a flag with my
Yeah.
name on it. I wasn't really interested in that. I was interested in doing great work, and that's how that story went. So it kind of ended and kind of got folded into this kind of pretty woven book and stored away until this year.
Yeah, because I think few people knew the story
Yeah.
of Bottega Veneta and how essential you were to it. And, when you left, did you kind of have a mind map of what you wanted to do before you launched Sansovino? Or what was it like in that period before you started working on
There was no
Sansovino?
roadmap. We were so when I left Bottega Veneta, actually, while I was still at Bottega Veneta, me and Manuela Morin, and this is years before Sansovino, we started this collection called Le Flèche, and it was a luxury capsule collection of accessories that Manuela Morin was designing. That meant shoes and handbags, and I was doing the apparel, which was essentially based in knitwear, but there were also leather separates that were working along with it. I remember Angelo Facavento, the first review of it, he described it as Victorian hip hop. So it was everything that we were, and we had come from working at a luxury house for, me 7 years and Manuela almost 10 years. And so we didn't have any understanding of business and how to create a business.
Yeah.
We knew how to do fashion. We knew how to do style. We know how to do we know how to make a
You knew how to make a
stink.
collection.
We knew how to make a stink.
Yeah.
And we thought in a way that we had the same budgets that we had at Bottega Veneta. So everything that we invested, which was our own money, into this company, we built these incredible collections, and we were in the best stores in the world, but we didn't know how to manage the business. And so I think we existed for probably like 4 or 5 years. I was increasingly becoming more poor. I'd started consulting, but after Bottega Veneta, the jobs weren't running at me like they were other people. My contemporaries are, Riccardo Tisci and Dean and Dan and Neil Barrett. These are the designers that were operating in Milan in the time that I were. And whereas many of them were finding consultancies and being hired and moving on and up, nothing was coming to me. And I realized, even in the early stages of Bottega Veneta, that designers like me, that looked like me, were nowhere to be seen and found. We were or in the folds. In Milan, there was a guy named Warren, who was a Black English designer that was working at Jill Sander. There was there were a few others. Lauren Steele,
Yeah.
who was at Prada at the time. There were a few of us in the folds. There were none at the head or as the creative directors, but they weren't tossing
It was all
contracts
behind
at
the
me.
scenes and
They weren't tossing contracts at me to come in. So it was an extremely difficult time for me. I wasn't finding work, and I always explain to people, a glossy headline is cute, and it can be misconceiving in a way because the path that I've followed or led or worked has been rocky in it, and it was always up and down. There were moments
Yeah.
when I was on the cover of Women's Wear Daily and I had 3 cents in my pocket. That's the reality. That was always been the reality, and it's related to many things. But I think that being a Black designer working in an industry that is not supportive of others and myself was very apparent. And when I realized that, I had to figure out how to work around that and how to essentially attempt to change that.
yeah, and be equal parts Would you say you kind of had to become a chameleon of understanding that kind of temperature reading that we spoke about
100.
at the beginning came
100.
back? Because
Yeah.
I think what people don't realize often is that fashion, you can be at the top of your game and be the most celebrated person one day,
Mm-mm.
and then the next month you will
You're
be
out.
you'll be somebody that completely, people just move on.
Yeah.
Because novelty is what mainly used to drive and continues to drive this industry. But I want to take you to the third image, which is
Mhm.
the amazing South Sudanese model Grace Ball, shot by Zelinda Zanikeli for
Yeah.
your Sansovino collection,
Mm-mm.
Autumn Winter 15.
Yeah.
When you sent me this image, you said that you were very poor at the time,
Mm-mm.
because this was in 2014,
Yeah.
2015.
Mm-mm.
What was this was at the beginning of Sansovino.
Yeah.
What was it like for you to decide to launch?
Look at how chic she is.
She is incredible.
I love this. I love this look, and I love this image. But it just goes to tell you that the creative process in design, and the condition that you're in, doesn't necessarily read in the work that you do. And I
Yeah.
think that they're two very different things, because I was very lucid. I was at the top of my game in terms of what I thought I wanted to create, and how I built Sansovino, because Sansovino Say was started, it was started as a mission to, yes, create kind of this window display of creativity for myself, so that other people could see what I could do, so they could potentially hire me. I didn't have the money to build this, but I had to create something.
Yeah.
I had to create something as a face, so that people could say, "Oh my God, look at this. Who is this?"
It was your portfolio of talent at the
It
time.
was my portfolio, and then I also had to brand myself as a knitwear designer. That was the only way that I could get into companies, because at the time, if you remember, knitwear as a sector was always one of those things that existed in the inside of companies. And I thought to myself, if I brand myself as a knitwear designer, then maybe I could start to become, that exterior consultant. I wasn't a technician in the beginning stages. I learned everything at Bottega Veneta. I still wasn't a real technician on knitwear. I learned and became a technician. But when I built Sansovino Say, it was about that. It was about, oh my God, look at this. I called it knitwear. I mean, knitted situations and things, because it was everything that worked around cutting, sewing, and crafting knitwear. Um, I, I was always so proud of my collaborations, the people that I work with. Yes, the knitters, yes, the models, yes, the choreographers, yes, the photographers that I work with in this period, because it was a really honest period. I had no fucking money, dude. So the factory that I was working with, which was Silvana Galbuzera factory, we partnered. All of this is created with recycled yarns. So I was going into factories. I was saying, oh, you get rid of this yarn, let's use this yarn, let's use this yarn. It was materials, and it was very grassroots, and it was survival,
Yeah.
and survival was the survival of me not having money to pay rent and not knowing where to go, was unrelated to knowing that I could create something
Yeah.
beautiful.
It didn't take away from your creativity and talent.
didn't.
It just was
It didn't. It
circumstantial.
hindered it, but it didn't take away from it.
And in that moment when you kind of debuted that,
Mm.
what was the response? Because that was a really kind of big moment, I think, also for fashion moving into knitwear. And we can also talk about how the 2010s, mid 2010s, was kind of the rise of the sweatshirts,
Yeah.
and fashion becoming a lot more, I guess, influenced by social media, by technology. What was this first collection like to you post creating it?
Well, it was, again, it didn't jump off right away, but what I was doing in that period was, it was important for me, the element of innovation in knitwear, and I started developing in the early stages this kind of knitted denim. That became the thing for Sansovino Say, and it was something that we developed for seasons, and this is pre early diesel, those jegging situations. I'm not talking about jeggings. This was like fully fashioned knitted jeans and denim, and it was denim jackets and denim jeans, and it took off in a way because it was the innovation that led. We were in the best stores in the world, but were they buying us full scale in order to support the business. Not necessary. I was in the Net-a-Porter's. Natalie Messonnier was like one of the early fans of the work that I did. So I had great space in the best stores, but great space, a great business does not make.
Yeah. Can only get you so far.
it gets you in, and what started to save me is that by building this up, I became kind of more visible as, again, a consultant, and I was able to start working inside of different companies. What really saved me in that period, after I started at Sansovino Say, was Jennifer Lopez. No, not many people know this as well. I don't really talk about my celebrity moment, because in that period in Italy, no one was really hiring me to work within the context of design and luxury houses, even if I only knew luxury. And you'd be surprised to understand that the companies that would contact me, even if I had a history in only working in luxury goods and working with craftsmanship, they would be like, oh my God, yeah, maybe we could have you design some hoodies, and maybe we could have you design some sweatsuits. And it was like that very like,
Surface
oh,
level.
you're black, you're urban, you can design sportswear. And it was like very like black and white for them, and they were not seeing the work that I've done. But with that said, early stages when I was doing The Flesh, we had started working a lot with Jennifer. We were working on, remember Made in Manhattan, this movie? Okay. So we did a lot of the costumes for that movie, and she really liked those things. And she discovered me and discovered the work that I was doing. And she asked if I would be a consultant on Sweet Face. Now, Sweet Face was, let's say, her contemporary version of J-Lo. And in that time, if you remember, in the early 2000s, there was all these kind of celebrity brands, and they were aspirational brands, which meant that, this was the celebrity, and we're creating these products that they want to seduce you to purchase.
It was kind of the beginning of the celebrity fashion beauty space.
And so I was like, okay, let's do this, So I went to New York City, and I worked with Jennifer, and it was chaotic and it was funny, and I worked with a lot of celebrities in that period. I worked with Iman. It was a crazy period, and it was not for me. I was never interested in celebrity as it relates to fashion and style. I was always the designer's designer, working from scratch, from the ground up. It wasn't about fame and fortune and identity and visibility for me. It was about craftsmanship and beauty, which was my personal idea of fashion. And so it was an interesting period, but I was like, bye.
I want to go back to Milan.
Give me back to Italy.
To the factory.
Yeah. And then, that's when I developed Sansovino and Say, and then that's when I started to become kind of a full-scale consultant, and I created my space. Nothing was given to me, Angel, and I had to do so, because if I didn't do so, I wasn't able to eat. And so the companies were not coming to me. The headhunters were not hiring me. They would see me. They would say, this is great work, but we wasn't the pieces were not being connected. So it was kind of like I had to kind of like build up this castle, and it's taught me that being an entrepreneur, building up, telling your own story is the most important thing, because once you have it and you build it, no one can take it away from you. My name is on the door right now. I still have it. It's 15 years that I have Sansovino Say. I call the shots. I come out when I want to come out. I distribute how I want to distribute. I do exactly what I want to do with it. And from there, I was able to kind of like build other spaces. And
it's your nucleus that you can always come back to, no matter how crazy things get up and down. And I mean, this is kind of also tied to the next image which you sent, which was the kind of flags mood board that you sent me for your Sansovino Autumn-Winter 2019 collection.
Wild, no?
You kind of said that it was in a moment where you were also working with Virgil.
Yeah.
And you were working on Off-White, and you were kind of head of knitwear at Off-White for many seasons. What was it like when you kind of started to work with someone as visionary and, somebody that can really, as you said,
Mm.
we've talked before about it, but you said he really spoke my language
Yeah.
and ideas.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What was that like?
Well, you know, I met Virgil through Kanye, and Kanye had been, as he does, been contacting me for a while, and I met Virgil through Kanye and then Marcelo Burlone. And I don't know how this happened, but one day Kanye and Virgil were like on the beach somewhere, and they had Kanye always had like a million images on his desktop, right? And he had some sense of, 6 images, and Virgil told me that he told him one day, he was like, "Oh, that's my boy, Edward," you know? He was like, "Yo," like, and so this kind of relationship started. We ended up being in the same showroom, and this is pre Off-White. I was doing Sense of Say,
To early
and
2010s.
yeah, and in the end, we knew each other. We were in the same space. I admired him. He's from the Midwest. I'm from the Midwest. We really spoke the same language. I could really understand him and his creativity and his the energy. Virgil never slept. I mean, it was just like, I don't know. It was a very, very seductive and beautiful energy that this man had. And he contacted me. And at the time when he first contacted me, I couldn't work with him. I was doing other things, and it also was a product that I didn't understand. And I thought, how am I going to collaborate? What are we doing here? I had to kind of figure it out. But in retrospect, maybe there was like, I don't know, a fear of being pigeonholed into like a sportswear designer or a streetwear designer. I don't know. But when I started working with him, it was like the best collaboration that I've to date. The best collaboration that I've ever had. And I've worked in a lot of spaces with a lot of different people, a lot of diverse talents, a lot of ideas. He was incredible because he respected me as a creative, as I respected him as a creative. And you have to remember that he went up. I was his senior, you know?
Yeah.
And it's rare, it's very rare that a creative will reach up and give you the space to create within the space of someone else's business. There was never any angst and crossover. It was only this kind of angst in the
Yeah.
creative process. He allowed me to work. I allowed him to lead. It was like I learned so much from him. I learned so much in terms of, he always told me, Edward, that's a great sweater. How does it look on the phone? Open it up on the phone. You know what I mean? Like these are things that, as a
Yeah.
creative, for me, it was never a consideration. It was for me, touch and feel. But he kind of really introduced me into this kind of digital space and how you view product and imagery through the digital space, which was never a consideration for me. And but exterior of that, he was just this magnificent creative. Virgil had a very clear understanding of who his consumer was, unrelated to what people thought of him, what people thought of his creativity. I don't want to hear about it.
Yeah.
What was incredible about Virgil, and you cannot ever question, is that the connection that he had to exactly who his consumer was. And that was just amazing. It was like, I mean, I was creating sweaters at the time that were selling like, you know, 10,000 per color, the numbers were just astronomical.
Next level
It
of
was like,
production.
it was just incredible. And people were just obsessed. He created this kind of community and movement that was just beautiful. And that he existed in that space at the time was, that was like, yeah, it was wild. And he, he offered me space in that moment when no one else was. And he's a black man. And a lot of the people who offered me opportunity were Black and brown people in that time. Jennifer Lopez, Iman, Virgil.
Yeah.
The others weren't coming. They saw me. They saw the talent. They saw the responsibility. They saw the history, and they respected that. And there was nothing else playing. There was no other game playing in between there. But so he reached out and he offered me that space. And I mean, I have to I have to thank him for seeing that, and insisting.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, from there, because I was in that Virgil Abloh world, all of a sudden the others were like, "Oh my God, who's this guy, Edward
Yeah.
Buchanan? I've been around for 20 fucking years. Like, where you been?" I had been around in and out of these companies, but it's kind of like face value, They never know what they have until they see it in a space or in a surrounding where there's a gloss and a light to it,
Yeah. And there's something that's, I guess, current, or there's some
Yeah.
object of desire that is connected to it. And I mean, with this image, you said that basically this was kind of a moment in your life where you had to rethink things.
Yeah. Well,
Tell me a little bit.
this was it's interesting because this collection that I was building was really about conflict. And it's very, very interesting. And we're talking about right before COVID. So this is, end of 2019, 2020. So this is 2000. COVID was in 2020, right?
2020, yeah.
So this is right at 2020, and this is the first season of Virgil at Louis Vuitton, and this is also the building of my collection, which was in, again, Vicenza, that I was building this collection. And so I was thinking about the idea of conflict, and you'll see, the Palestinian flag and the Israeli flag and the American flag, and it was like, how are these entities really working within the space of conflict, and how can we come together? And interestingly enough, I didn't know what Virgil was doing at Louis Vuitton. I had no idea, obviously, because I wasn't working at Louis Vuitton. I was only working in the off-white space. And then I was in Paris, like the collection was like built. Dude, I had everything, you know what it's like,
Yeah.
And I was like, and I saw the Louis Vuitton show, and I was like, no way. I was like,
This
it's
is how connected you
impossible.
were.
I was like, it's impossible. And the flags started to come out, and they were holding the flags, and there was pareos and stuff with flags. And I was like, I just can't do it. I can't come out with this because I respect Virgil too much, and it wasn't, no one copied anyone. It was just kind of like a synced moment.
Yeah.
And I had to shift things around and move on. And then the world collapsed, and so the collection came out, and it was done in a different way and presented in a different way. But creativity works in this way. I think you kind of, you got to roll with the punches sometimes.
Yeah. And I guess see ideas as something that, you can. I mean, this was very, I mean, when you think about it, in the space we're in nowadays, this is very much like predecessors to what's happening.
Yeah. But also, I can't work in any other way but be honest. And there's a lot of conflict also in my process as a creative. There's a lot of conflict in the spaces that I work in, the visibility that I now have, and the opinions and words and emotion that I have that I can't hide. And I'm not the creative that is going to be kind of submissive to a system that is or has never been really absolutely supportive of creatives like myself. So I open my mouth whenever I can, and I'm not ashamed of it. And I'm absolutely sure that in some places I get less work than many others who have nothing to say about the space that we live in, nothing to say about the politics that we're involved in. Anyone that tells you that creativity should be separate from politics is bullshitting you. So I'm the dude that's gonna like throw the wrench in your engine every time. All the time. And if I receive less or less opportunity as a result, I have to know that it's because of that.
I want to now take you to a very personal image of yours,
Mm.
which is you and your boyfriend Gio, shot by Letizia Ciliuti
Mhm.
for Family Style.
Mm.
This is a very personal image, and this is, I think, knowing you for a few years, I know how you don't show off as nobody kind of knows the enigma behind the person. Tell me a little bit about why you chose this image.
Well, I chose this image for many reasons. First of all, it's a new studio that I'm building, which I feel like I've been building for 10 years, but it's a space that the first space that I've ever owned in all the years that I've worked. In the 30 years I've been in this building, I've never owned my own space. I've never owned my own apartment. I've only owned beautiful clothing and have many opinions about many things, but I've never owned something. And so I bought this office space that I'm building up, and it's going to be part community center for creatives from like, disadvantaged environments, but it's going to be part community center and then office and archive, right? So this is a shoot that was being done for a magazine within this space. It just so happens that obviously Giovanni was there with me during this time, and I don't know. I look at the expression on our faces, which was just so natural, and Joe I met in. You're absolutely right, because I'm never like, my life is something kind of very personal and intimate, and I don't really necessarily show those things by way of social media. People that know me know about my life, and they know about my relationship, my incredible relationship with Giovanni, but he's just such a special guy. And he is I've learned patience. I've learned honesty. I've learned how to live within the environment of someone alike, but at the same time very different, comes from a different background. But I don't know, it's a very special relationship. We connect in so many ways. He's funny, he's talented, he's a pain in the ass, he has good taste. There's all these, yeah, I don't know, you find qualities in people and you connect, and he's, more than 15 years my junior. I don't know. I love this picture. I love our our comfort with each other. I don't know. It's a really special relationship. And it's the first time in a long time that I live with a partner, which I thought was going to be a disaster. I thought it was going to be a fucking disaster. I was like, are you fucking kidding? But yeah, no, we've grown.
You've almost grown together.
Yeah.
How long have you been together now?
It's now going on 7 years. Yeah. More over 6 years. And we met around COVID again. Everything happened around COVID. Go
When the
figure.
world completely shifted.
Yeah, and so because of the world that was closing down, and we were together right before it happened, we ended up, spending COVID together. And yeah, that kind of like sealed the deal, I think. There's that the beauty in this is also that in a relationship there's always fear as well, and insecurity, and the times that we were together, and I didn't have an opportunity, I didn't have work, he was always supportive. When he doesn't have work, I'm supportive. It's like, what I really learned? This is what I learned. In a relationship, and I think he taught me this, I always thought that it was 50-50. I always thought like you have to give half and the other person have to give half. But the reality is that there's going to be times when I only have 20% and the other one has to give 70. There's going to be times when the other partner, when Joe needs more than me. You kind of have to meet the individual where they are. And I think I realized this after having so many relationships, that it's never going to be split right down the middle. There's always going to be this kind of like, you're good. What do you need? If I have the strength and I have the stamina and the mental capacity to give you more, then yeah, I'm going to give you more. And I think we found this balance. So
Yeah, and that's, I think, the partnership is about being very balanced, about the fact that things are not going to always go great because there's so many things happening in life. And
Jesus Christ, I mean,
and do you feel like you found now, after so many years, balance? Because you threw yourself right in the deep end from a very young age, and you've kept throwing yourself in the deep end. How do you feel now, looking back at it?
Have I found balance? I talk to my therapist about this all the time because I'm in constant fear of failure, in the sense that I've been in so many situations at the top of a game, and then all of a sudden it's almost like a rug is pulled from underneath you and you start from the beginning again. So my career has been an absolute roller coaster. There's never been a time where I felt stability. I felt like, even if I've had money in the bank, to have a sense of being stable, where you feel like you don't have to worry about things, is a luxury. And I've been in that position before, and from the outside, everyone thinks I'm just this kind of, I'm a resolved senior creative director that's worked in the industry for a long time, and everything is like, squared away, and you're good, and you own property, and you have all of these things, and it's just not the reality. I'm fragile, and I don't know. I'm not always secure about what tomorrow is going to bring. And, there's all of these things that's just an honest way of being a creative. But I have to kind of admit to myself that I'm somehow established.
Yeah.
And that's a scary statement to make, but it's hard. It's always hard for me to be kind of resolved in a centered, creative, knowing that I have money in the bank, I have health, I have a family, I have a loving boyfriend, and I'm good. But I'm always worried about others. That's a part of my game, and I think that I can't be happy in my success if there are others like me, or that would have that are potentially like I was when I was young, are still out there kind of like flailing around. It's always me attempting to
because you've been
reach
through
out.
it, and you've lived. I only think that you only have had to live it and experience it in order to see when, it's how important it is to help other people and support other people and creatives, especially in an industry like ours that is so volatile at many times. And I mean, closing things full circle, your last image is, I mean, it's an incredible image. It's you starring in Bottega Veneta's Spring Summer 25 campaign.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's wild, man.
I think when I saw this again, knowing you, it's such a warm feeling when you see this, because I think it's, first of all, so full circle, but it's such a celebration of who you are. And what do you see when you look at that image now, after all of these years, after the struggle, after the triumphs, after the ups and downs of everything?
Well, I mean, I love this image for so many reasons. And we'll talk about the Bottega Veneta part, but Jack Davison was he was so incredible. I felt, you can see it in this image, I felt completely comfortable, because when they first contacted me, it was like, oh my God, what do they want? It was like, all the time that went in between. I'd never been contacted by Bottega Veneta through the Daniel years, through the Mitu years, through the Thomas Meyer years. This was the first time after all of those years that they thought to contact me as the first apparel designer that was in the company. So it's a milestone. And when they contacted me, I was like, what's going on, you know? And they explained to me it's 50th year anniversary of Intrecciato, and they thought it'd be appropriate that I be involved in the campaign. And I was like, that's wild. But then it seemed correct.
Yeah.
It was correct. And Louise started, and then shortly after, she contacted me. And that's badass, you know? And that is the strength of a incredible woman at the helm of a house that 3 men prior to her did not do. She's amazing, and to include me in this was beautiful. But I mean, the image, it's like me laughing, you know, I'm like cool, I'm happy, having a beautiful shirt, I'm giving you the peace sign, um, and I love I don't know, I love the expression, and when I look at it, I felt in the same way that I feel now, like absolutely comfortable in being there. It was a time when this happened, and it just took off, that I realized the importance of storytelling. And there's so many stories that are just in the creases, in the folds, that have just never been told. But I never thought it would be my story. I never thought, I know what I've done. I know what I've contributed. Um, I know what I've loved. I know what I've hated. I know the experiences, you know, I know the cavity searches. I know the not having money to pay rent. You know, it's 30 plus years of like fucking roller
Yeah.
coasters, you know?
Highest highs, lowest lows, highest
And
highs.
those experiences are stories that are useful for people to know. And it's not just based on the idea that, oh my God, he's a success. It's like, what did you go through in order to do that? And how did you come out and able to be smiling with a peace sign, you know? And so they saw the importance of storytelling. I was there first. I was the first one to do the apparel. And they thought that story was important for the continuation to understand what they have done and what they've built as a brand. And I thought that was pretty cool. And so I said yes, and I felt absolutely at home. They treated me right. and and then the kind of like the storm after was crazy because there were so many people. And I never thought about it, really. I really never
Yeah.
thought about it, but there were so many people that didn't know this story, and it was just shared. And then, you know, prior to this happening, you know, Luke Leach wrote a beautiful story on me for Vogue magazine. And I think that kind of like, that was kind of a launching pad for a lot of people that didn't actually know about me or what I had done. It kind of, the dots were connected.
Yeah.
And yeah, it happened.
And how
Wild.
thinking, about this last year
Mm.
after it happened and thinking about the future, what do you see when you look in the mirror and you look at your stories and you look at the celebration now? What is you
Who's celebrating?
know what do you kind of see for yourself now and for the future?
I'm oh, I live day by day, Angel. No, I'm still an active creative, and I'm working on a lot of beautiful projects now. Um, my future is to get this fucking office finished and get this community center running. I really know that the importance of my existence is to be invested in young creatives that look like me, that feel like me, that didn't have opportunity like me, that are searching for knowledge like I was searching for, um, that are unseen in the face of an industry that has billions and has opportunity. And it's all given to white males that are at the top of the totem pole, you know, and in this industry, we constantly, daily see the promotions of those who don't fit into this box, you know? And so if I didn't take or do not take the opportunity to address those things, then what am I really doing, you know? I'm in this industry for a long time. I've learned a lot. I have access. I know people. So if I'm not the one to be able to kind of reach out and help, then who is? I mean, look at Grace Wells Bonner right now. That's fucking major, you know? It's like, I hate to talk about first, but can you just imagine that she's the first Black woman at the helm of a luxury house?
Yeah.
How
And
does
it's
that make
2025.
How does that make sense? How does that even make sense? And then also, she's so perfect for the job. You know, she should have been there years ago, but there's so many others like her. Um, she's worked very hard. She's she deserves that position and she deserves that opportunity. And there are a million others like her that can't even get to those stages because they can't even get through college to get a degree, you know? So if I can be the way to offer a space and an opportunity for a creative, maybe they're a chef, maybe they're a photographer, maybe they're a fashion designer, and they need space, and we get funding, and they can work within this community space to do projects and also to get exposure, then I think that's my future. I'm a designer. I'm the designer's designer. I said it in the beginning of the conversation. I am the fashion designer of designers, and I will always do that. But I'm 55, and the reality is, I'm going to be moving towards the future much more interested in making sure that others are smooth and settled into being creatives as well, so that I can, yeah, open the door for many.
Edward Buchanan, thank you so much for being on Fashion Forensics.
Thank you for having me.